Hello, I'm Malcolm Harslett. What's been happening to our finances over the last 9 months? And will the government or our savings be able to fix the doom and gloom that's being predicted? Some important information we should all know next on OurTime. Hello, great to have your company once again with OurTime. Now, I don't know about you, but I guess most people all over the world at the moment are concerned about their finances and what they're going to do about them. So our good friend John Grocke has joined us with hopefully some fantastic advice, be it on your head.
Okay, thank you.
Too much?
No.
To start a program with too much?
No.
So John, the government's telling us we should get out and spend, but I guess our souls are telling us we should get out and save. What should we do?
It's an interesting question because the government are
Only
relying...
ask interesting ones, John.
Sorry?
Only ask interesting questions. Sorry.
No, that's good. The government would love us to spend, and that's the idea of the stimulus. But in fact, when people aren't confident, they tend to save. And if anything, simple things like pay off debt. So I think it's going to be a challenge to see whether people can actually spend some of the savings that are going to come through these stimulus packages the government have offered, which are massive, by the way.
Well, exactly. But as all the pundits keep telling us, our children are going to be paying for this. But historically, is that going to be any different to the 20s? Of course, that led to the Great Depression or after World War II, and that led to an enormous influx of everything, really. Do you think that's going to happen again, or are we really going to be sort of on our backsides for the next 50 years?
We're in a position where it's quite unpredictable at the moment, and I think uncertain. And we're in an environment I don't think we haven't experienced in our lifetime.
We haven't,
no.
But historically we have.
There have been, everything is cyclical, and there is a cycle that we're going through, and a cycle that's probably been extended because governments have been desperately trying to protect our financial system.
But do you think suddenly everyone's going to go broke and there'll be no services in the future? Or do you think that as soon as the COVID thing is under control, people will just get back to living a normal life?
Getting back to some balance, I think, is the key. And balance is about people being able to at least provide for themselves, put food on the table, and have some sort of capability to work. But we also then need to protect those who are vulnerable. And we do have a segment of our community that do need a framework around them so that they are protected.
Do you think people like you exist because most people really don't understand how to control or invest or save or use their money wisely, so there's a little bit now and a little bit then and a little bit further on down their lives? Do you think we need more education about finances just generally?
I think it's something people always have to work with when they leave school. Money is something that people don't necessarily have a lot of knowledge about always, but it's something they, in a practical sense, have to use every day and apply it in some way over their lifetime. So education early in people's schooling is really important.
Well, it's like learning to cook food, really, isn't it? I mean, we need to eat and we don't want to eat the same thing all the time. So again, getting money, we need to know how to let it go when it needs to go and what are the things we need to have perhaps a bigger picture for and an immediate picture for and something that's in between. Do you feel, is that advice?
I think that is correct. And I think people find today that there's confusion because interest rates are so terribly low.
Yes.
And people that were normally getting a level of income from some money in savings accounts are getting very little and almost being encouraged unrealistically to look elsewhere and take on risks that perhaps they're totally unfamiliar with.
Well, that I think is probably the biggest worry of all, extending yourself like these pay later plans. Is there a simple sort of formula in life that you would perhaps advise to say, you know, out of 100% of your earnings, if you're earning, that is, but if you're not earning, the chances are you have some sort of support. And if you don't have that, these are the vulnerable people you were talking about. But is there like a formula, like save 20%, spend 20% on food, put 20% to the house. I'm making this up.
Well, I think if you're in the category where you've left work and retired, there are some really simple places that you can look for a guide on that in terms of what the average is. The Australian Superannuation Fund Association and Westpac do a survey of retirees, and they actually formulate a budget that's considered to be average. Now, some will be over, some less, but it gives people an idea. So there's a website where you can actually look up retirement income in Australia and expenses, and it shows you a budget. Where some of the greater risk lies is for the generation who've taken on debt in a very relaxed manner.
So this would be like the people who have just bought a new home, perhaps, or taken out loans for cars or other goods.
Homes in particular, and homes in particular where people expect and have lived through interest rates falling and being low, and that perception is it's always like that.
So it's how long is it? How long have the interest rates been this low?
We've
5 years.
We've had a declining interest rate for over 10 years.
Right.
And once you get interest rates declining in that sort of trend, there's almost an acceptance that it's always like that. The truth is it's not. At some point it will change.
Get Paul Keating back. Have the recession we had to have. Because I remember those times. I'm sure you remember those times as well, because I think the interest rates got to about 24%.
Yeah, they certainly, loans certainly got to 17, 18%.
I reckon
Quite
I was paying
extraordinary.
24% on something at that time.
Yeah. So people that have substantial mortgages need to work out if they've got an adequate margin. That simply means if they're paying 3%, which is probably common, they should work it out at 5 and 6 and see how their income might fare with interest rates at that level. We don't need interest rates at 18% as we experienced through our lifetime. Interest rates only need to move a few percent and there would be some pressure on
Significant,
borrowers.
yes, significant. Because suddenly there's all this extra money you've got to find
That's right.
that you didn't budget for. And budgeting is really the name of the game, isn't it? No matter what you earn, if you budget what you can play with and what you need to save.
Budgeting seems to be one of those things that people find a burden. However, it actually provides freedom because then you can make decisions about what you have left over and how you deal with it.
Right. Okay, so at the moment, the government is trying to be generous to keep people working and getting them back to work and to try and look after the people who aren't working. And clearly, there are people in our society that don't fall into any of those categories that we keep hearing about every night on the news. But for the average person who does have an income, who does have a little bit of disposable cash, we've talked in the past about starting to go on holidays and leaving a bit of your money behind everywhere because that's sort of going to get the economy. Is this really true? Is this what's really going to happen?
One of the things that's been the beneficiary of this unusual environment has been people doing work at home, which they probably wouldn't have otherwise done. So people doing work and renovating at home does extend into a number of significant areas of our economy. Retail, for instance, has had a lift for that. People travelling.
Because people are home and can
they can't,
instead of doing their job, go for a bit of a surf.
The job list can actually be attacked.
But mind you, when you think about the amount of money saved in fuel or transport, travel to and from work, when you think about the lunches and things that you didn't buy because you were home and not at work, a lot of people have suffered from that, but the average person probably could have saved quite a bit more.
And I think some of that money has been paid off mortgages, so there's been a significant lift in people's saving or repaying debt.
Is that a good thing?
In the short term, it is.
It's always a good thing to pay off debt.
Absolutely.
Yes. I think that's advice you give every time.
Yeah.
Well, it is good advice. But maybe it's considered old-fashioned advice now. Is it?
I think there's two different types of debt. There's what we call good and bad. Good is the stuff where potentially you get some benefit from the tax system because it's orientated around investment. Bad debt is stuff that you have to physically pay tax on first and then pay off. So any lifestyle asset like your home is considered bad debt, and that's good stuff to
get rid of.
Or to shrink, because you want to make sure that your margin is there if interest rates rise at some point over the next 5 years.
You won't be struggling. But then, is good debt the sort of debt that the government is putting the country into at the moment with all the handouts?
I think the government, my personal view is the government probably had no choice, and I think a lot of what the government have done has been good. Yeah. And the structure of what they're doing is probably perfect as long as that does start to circulate in the economy. Mm-hmm. That's the question mark. It would only take a few unexpected events to create greater uncertainty and lack of confidence, and people would probably be more focused on saving or putting aside rather than spending. So that's the unknown. Yeah,
it's a big risk, but we're all taking this risk together. So we've just got to take a short break, and we'll be back in a tick to talk some more with John. We're talking finance actually with John Grocke. And John, one of the things that I think is worrying many, many people is their mental health over this whole, first of all, I guess whether they'll get COVID-19, whether somebody they know, whether they're losing their job because of it, whether their finances are running out, how will a family be, how am I going to look towards the future? And I think the thing that's becoming very oppressive is through the media, we're constantly hearing how things have changed forever. And I think that's probably the most depressing thing I've heard. Money is obviously one of the most important things that causes mental stress, along with probably being overweight and can I afford the next house payment and will my teenage child come home? So how does one cope with this, with the pressure of finance?
I think just to paint a bit of a picture here, I have a role in some of the work I do as a trustee for National Super Scheme. 35% of claims across the superannuation industry are mental health related. So it paints a bit of a picture, and this isn't just the last 6 months. This has been a trend developing.
Right.
So I think COVID's actually layered or put another layer on top of what already was a challenging environment.
There, yes.
I would suggest that people, as much as we feel connected with technology, it's actually adding to people's stress level to some degree.
Because we're not talking enough about it?
Some of that.
Or seeking help?
And I think seeking help is extremely important, because the financial environment we're in is going to continue to create uncertainty. And uncertainty is, as human beings, we really don't like uncertainty. We need to have a pretty solid picture of exactly what's going to happen.
Exactly.
We don't have that at the moment. I would suggest people do need to seek help. Put their hand up, actually ask someone if they feel that the financial situation they're in is actually starting to oppress them, because it won't go away. They need help to deal with it.
Well, I remember when this whole thing hit, the bank manager rang me up and said, do you want to take a holiday on your loan? And I thought, yeah, well, because we don't know what's going to happen, it would make sense to do that. But at the same time, I thought, yes, but I'm still going to owe the same amount of money. And the longer it's there, I'm still going to be paying more interest on that money, I assumed. So I didn't take that option. Not that I have a big loan to make it a problem, but it does make you think, whilst there seems to be some generosity here, maybe the generosity isn't as generous as maybe you think it is.
I think the idea of giving people a holiday, if we can call it that, on their loan was probably...
It's a good idea, but an odd term, I felt.
It is a very odd term, because a holiday doesn't mean to say that you aren't going to have the responsibility of, at some point, recommencing your obligation. So
I'd say it's like having two houses, the one you live in and the that you're paying for, and the holiday house you're going to pay for to go on holidays.
Something like that.
Yes.
And I think one of the stats that's around at the moment is that of the loans that are on holiday, 1 in 5 people aren't responding to the banks, because the government have already said, or the Reserve Bank have actually said, look, bankers, go and start to talk to these people, because they need to start to think about when they're going to recommence. And something like 12% of loans in Australia are on holiday at the moment. So 1 in 5 of those loans at the moment, people aren't talking to their bankers, which means they probably think it's going to go away, and it won't go away.
If you owe money, it never goes away.
No.
But John, would it be wise then to say, well, could I go into interest only for a few months or something like that?
The key would be to negotiate, and negotiation means communication, which means
Face to face.
you need to talk to people and actually work out what's going to fit with your circumstance.
Yes, that's actually really good advice. What's going to fit with your circumstance? And you really need to be aware of what that is. Don't try and bury your head in the sand.
No.
I love the idea. My mum used to do this. I think it was something that probably the church actually instilled in them in those days. This is back in the 50s. She used to have a whole lot of jam jars in the cupboard.
Yep.
And when Dad brought the cash home each week, £2 would go there and £2 would go there. Out of £15 or something a week that he earned, everything was divided up. And when the jar for food had run out of money, then she instigated clever ideas.
There's a lot of common sense in that. It was a very simple budgeting tool.
Yes, because you could see it. I think that's why. We're so electronic now, sometimes we're a bit afraid to look at the computer with those figures or the bank statement just to see what's really happened.
There are some really good apps that you can get on your phone that can help you manage your money and give you a picture of exactly what you're doing with it moment by moment. And some people find that helpful. Or if you want to set up a budget in a more conventional way, the ASIC website have got a segment called Money Smart, or a section called Money Smart. You can actually log in and they've got all the headings there. You can make up a budget quite easily.
Is there any value in opening more bank accounts? I don't mean lots. I mean, is there any advantage in having sort of a trading or a day-by-day account to use, and also having a savings account that perhaps you put 10% of your income to each week or something like that?
One of the, you've touched on an interesting area, because if we talk about someone who's got a large mortgage, there's what's called a mortgage offset account, and that's where people can store surplus cash flow and it directly offsets their mortgage. It's a really simple but great idea. The concept of having a transaction account separate from your saving account is actually really good, because then you can allocate what you need for expense and you can physically put aside that which is surplus.
So really what you're saying is we need to genuinely take control of our finances rather than just letting things happen. What about these sort of like lay-by systems, but you get the goods and you're going to pay them off over a period of time? Are they a good idea?
Two different types there. The pay later regime has really attracted the younger generation.
Notice that.
Probably because historically how we would have done it is put it on a credit card, and if we missed the...
Or lay-by.
Or lay-by, that's right, lay-by.
Yep.
With the pay later system, as long as you meet your amount of repayment and don't miss, it's a really good deal.
But
the
if
challenge,
you do miss...
If you do miss, there are penalties, and that's the catch. If you do miss, you're going to pay a premium for the facility.
Right. So thank goodness we live in a country that's got a government like we've got, irrespective of which party it was. Both of them would have done exactly the same thing, because it's just sort of humane to do that. And I think we're all aware that whichever government was in power, somebody had to do something like has been done. But I guess the next stage of that is literally what is going to happen in 6 months that nobody knows, including the government. So there's going to be people criticising either way. But for the average person, is there just that simple way to think? Is it simply put a little away, spend a little, and do whatever you need to do to keep living in a society like we live? And that could involve entertainment as well, because for my situation in a theatre, Of course, we haven't been able to have people to see shows or product. So we've been hanging on by our fingernails as well.
The difficulty in this environment is to actually understand how much it will free up, because as we've seen, COVID's still evident on a second wave in many places. So I think...
Not just in Australia either. It's important to recognise
absolutely
what's happened in Europe.
In fact, I think Australia's, as you said, extremely fortunate, because it's good, and it's good to be living in Adelaide, simply because we've been very fortunate.
Yeah.
But Australia is at least isolated and somewhat protected. We're actually going to summer too, which is probably helpful.
Yep.
I think in a financial sense, people need to understand what the likelihood is if they have been out of work. Are they going to go back to work? If there's any question about going back to work, they need to recut their budget and reconsider what obligations they've got and how they manage them.
John, a friend of mine who lives in the UK, we were talking on the phone the other night, which thank goodness we have these platforms that we can just chatter on for next to nothing. But she was saying she worked in television over there and that's closed down for her. She said, well, I've applied to work in a railway station issuing tickets. I've applied to do some cleaning work. I've applied. She is very qualified to do the jobs that she's doing, but she can't find those jobs at the moment. Do we need to also rethink what we need to do for a job for the short term at least?
It's interesting, just looking at... One example, the airline industry has been impacted enormously. There are pilots who've gravitated back to the military because that's where they originally came from. Very qualified senior pilots. The military have now said, we've got enough. Some of those pilots are stacking shelves at Woolworths. I think it is about being adaptable.
Adaptable is the word. And we're adaptable, and we will adapt ourselves to be back in a tick. Our special guest is financial advisor John Grocke. John, some last minute advice to people who are worried or just not sure what the future holds.
Sure, I reckon there's a simple saying, whatever it takes. So let's just put that in ordinary terms. Australians are resilient. Make sure you understand what your fixed expenses are. Be very clear about what it costs you to live. Know what that discretionary expense is and review all the discretionary expenses if you find that you're under pressure.
We may not always be able to continue in the profession or the jobs that we have been doing all our lives as well. Maybe we need to just reassess what we do to earn.
I think it is a matter of need and understanding that if you can get a job and earn a quid in some way, that's a good idea.
Like you were saying about even maybe stacking supermarket shelves.
Sure.
And cleaning, or, you know, there's a lot of things that people need. Sometimes you make the best friendships doing something that perhaps you wouldn't normally do. And it's also a bit of a holiday from the profession that you've had all your life, you know.
And it's interesting, sometimes people innovate at their best when they have to think of something alternate.
Talking to a friend today and he was saying, I don't know, there's no challenges, it seems. There's nothing to challenge me anymore in my life. And I said to him, probably the greatest challenge is to realise what we've achieved in our lives so far and be grateful for that. Yeah. Because when times are tough, sometimes our memories work better than anything else for our mental state of mind.
Absolutely. And I think it's when times are tough that people actually learn the most. And
Tough, get going, isn't that the song?
That's right. Exactly.
But it's true. It's
yeah,
and as you said before, as Australians, we've always had to have a move forward sort of attitude. Yeah. She'll be right, mate, let's get on with the job sort of attitude.
Exactly.
And probably now more than ever, it's time to consider that's the way we have to go. Speaking of going, we have to. Keep yourself nice till next time we meet. When we have a very special guest next week. In fact, the guest is the person who follows this show with a chat show. And we'll meet her then. See you soon.